This week there will be an apology from the South Africa's Sport and Recreation Minister, the Reverend Makankizi Stofile. There was apparently, but that's always been disputed, but there will now be a formal apology to all of those, I think led by the current South Africa Rugby President, Mark Alexander, to New Zealand and to those New Zealand players and their ancestors who have been unable to tour South Africa because they were Māori or players of colour because of the apartheid policies of the South African governments of the time. And that apology is to be delivered or this week, I understand. In 1970, a group for the very first time of Māori and we'll talk about it in just a second, and so-called coloured rugby players were included in the 1970s All Black team that toured South Africa. And one of them is our next guest, a New Zealander of Samoan background, who has been a legend of the game, Sir Bryan Williams. And he joins us now to talk about apology and to reminisce on that period of time. And he joins us. Bryan, fantastic to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you, Michael. It's nice to be here.
Listen, mate, you were a 19-year-old in 1970 and an honorary white when you toured South Africa in 1970. Did you know that that's how you got there, that you were being graded as an honorary white, or did you find that out later on?
Well, I think we actually found that out later on. But what a nonsense, Michael, to be classified as a honorary white. I knew what I was, and people have said to me over the course of time, well, why did you go? I knew what I was, and I wanted to be able to illustrate, like the other Māori boys, the fact that we could compete with the very best, and also it was groundbreaking stuff to be amongst the first so-called non-whites to be selected in an All Black team. So I was pleased to go and see it for myself.
Yeah, that's right. The tour of 1970, no Maori or, as you know, yourself of Pacific Island background had been. You were the first truly representative All Black team to tour South Africa in 1970. The other boys, the Maori boys that were there, were Blair Furlong, Buff Milner, and Sid Going. You were selected. Now, just tell me this: are you the first All Black of Samoan heritage to play for the All Blacks?
No, I'm not. There are a couple of Solomon brothers, Dave Solomon and Frank Solomon, who were first selected way back in the 1930s. Right. So there had been some Samoan players. There'd been some other Pacific Islanders. George Scudder. What was his name?
Jennings. Was it Jennings as well?
Arthur Jennings.
Arthur Jennings. Yeah.
1967, and another Tongan chap by the name of Walter Batty, way back also in the 1930s. So I wasn't actually the first, but I guess because of the significance of being one of those, the first to go to apartheid South Africa, it certainly created some publicity.
Yeah, well, that's right, and I remember the photo of the four of you was quite, I mean, it was history making stuff that the four of you were in that team and you went there. Listen, I've just before we talk about what we're going to talk about in terms of the apology, etc. When you went there as the All Blacks, and the All Blacks have a very, very strong, as I understand, support base from black spectators in South Africa to this day. What was the reaction of black spectators to the All Blacks in 1970?
Well, we became their boys. We I guess they saw us as representing the so-called coloured races.
Yeah.
But I'll just tell you a little story. Was just indicated the stupidity, I guess, of apartheid. When we arrived at Johannesburg airport, we climbed off the plane and walking through the terminal, and believe it or not, I spotted one of my cousins, my dad's sister, her daughter, who was living in South Africa at the time with her hubby, and I leant across to give her a peck on the cheek, and she actually pulled away from me. And later on, she apologized. She said, "Listen, Bryan, I'm really sorry I had to do that." But she said, "We can't take anything for granted. We can't be too sure about this apartheid." And it
Mm.
really just hit home to me, what apartheid was about. It was, tearing people apart, really, and that was a classic example of it.
When you toured South Africa and you became a legend, the way in which you played, that incredible sidestep, the power and the speed with which you played the game, your skill base, Bryan, you became a star on that particular tour. What was the reaction of white South Africans to you at that time?
Oh, I think generally speaking, you know, white South Africans and coloured South Africans are rugby fans. So the fact that we were representing the All Blacks meant, generally speaking, we were accepted. But we did have some incidents on that tour. I remember the game against Greekwell and West. After the game, some coloured boys put me up on their shoulders and were parading around the ground. And next minute, some drunk white guys came along and started punching them. And suddenly, I found myself on the ground, and the police had to come and sort of escort me off the field. So once again, unsavoury incidents, and it just made you realise just what apartheid was doing to people.
So, well, that was the 1970 tour. The 1973 tour of South African tour of New Zealand was called off by Norm Kurt. Did you agree with that action? Was that a good idea from your point of view that internal tour from South Africa in '73 should be banned?
Well, I realised, I was, dare I say it, I was a law student at that stage, and trying to make my way through a law degree. So I like to think that I was aware of, these sorts of issues. Um, we always knew that there was going to be protest and controversy, but naively, I guess, in those days, I was a rugby head and probably wanted to get the opportunity to get even with the Springboks after losing the series in 1970.
Mm.
But of course, as time went by, I changed my view to the point where what we saw in 1981 was just tearing New Zealand apart, and the outcome of that 1981 tour, of course, was that the South African government reviewed their apartheid policy, and Nelson Mandela ultimately became the president of South Africa. So that obviously was a really good outcome.
Yes, and next year I think the Māori All Blacks are touring South Africa as special guests of the South African Rugby Union. So obviously we've moved on, and rightly so. And obviously the black players are now a critical part of the world champion Springboks, and showing the futility of it all anyhow, really, given their school levels. Listen, the apology, though, that is going to be made or has been made from South African rugby, an overdue apology to the Māori All Blacks, but really it's an overdue apology to yourself as well. Does it have any effect upon you emotionally or otherwise?
Um, well, I I feel it's something that will be well received. I think of just the history of All Black rugby and George Napier in 1928 and
Yeah.
Johnny Smith in 1949,
Mm.
and other Māori players who were denied the opportunity to go to South Africa. Um, I'm sure for their whānau, that'll be well received. And you could say, there's already been some apologies, and why keep apologising? But I don't, I don't think you can ever apologise enough for those sort of awful events.
The players themselves that played against you in 1970, and I'm thinking in particular of the white players, and then again in '76, when the tour was taken there again as well, although obviously with Maori players this time. Did they treat you any differently as a consequence of being a player of colour, Bryan?
Not that I was aware of. No, I ended up uh, being selected in a World 15 for the English centenary in 1971, and played alongside a number of the Springbok players. In fact, I remember the first player I roomed with on that particular tour was Hannes Murray, who was one of the Springbok props, and we were chalk and cheese in terms of our backgrounds and philosophies on life. But when teams like that come together, you bond, you come together, and you're able to exchange views on life. And um, I don't know if we had a particularly strong discussion about the merits or otherwise of apartheid, but yeah, so that was an interesting aside.
Okay. And then, of course, there was the change, 1981. They came out here. We know that it was a seminal part, although ironically, I don't know if the implications were ever that great. Maybe we just said we'd never do it again. But then obviously the move to professional rugby, we're where we are now. How often have you been back to South Africa since the post-apartheid times?